is representative of the employed bar, which is obviously what the topic of today's talk is about. So today's talk is essentially the panel giving their views on what it takes to succeed at the employed bar. So just a few bits of housekeeping, first of all, about the format of this evening. The webinar will be being recorded, and as I mentioned before, Sandra, who is the BACFI secretary, who's on the line, will be able to explain how to obtain that later, and probably will follow up by email on that. Please do mute your microphones, and if you want to ask a question at the appropriate moment, then there's the virtual raising of your hand option, or there's the putting questions into the chat, which we'll then pick up towards the end. And feel free to put cameras on if you are asking a question, but otherwise it might be helpful to have your cameras off, just so that the panel appear on everybody's feed a bit more easily. So just by way of sort of housekeeping point there. Just a quick plug for BACFI. It does exist for employed barristers, and student membership until March 2023 costs only £20, so well worth getting involved. There are a number of events which I'll mention later on, and things are happening throughout the year, so good opportunity to be involved. Just to say that one of our panel today will not be joining us, and that's Patrick Rappo, who's a partner at DLA Piper. Unfortunately, sends his apologies as he can't make it now, but we'll do our best to field any questions that he might otherwise have answered. So very briefly, I'm chairing this evening's panel. My name is Daniel Byrne. I'm a partner at a boutique intellectual property litigation firm, also a firm of patent and trademark attorneys in London. And I am an employed barrister, so much like my colleagues on the panel as well, this will hopefully make sense to you after we've all introduced ourselves and explained our journey and how these things fit together. But my own background is I did a biochemical science degree at university, did a master's which bridged slightly into law, decided that was an interesting route for me, and sort of steered towards the intellectual property side of things because of my science background. That's what they all sort of tell you to do. As it happens, I do like intellectual property law, and I qualified after doing pupillage at Hogarth Chambers back in 2005 or 6, and after that I've essentially worked my entire career in the offices of law firms as an employee, and that's probably a good moment just to distinguish between the self-employed bar and the employed bar. The training route is very much the same, involving a pupillage after a period of academic and vocational training. And the difference is that ultimately, when you come out of that pupillage, or possibly during that pupillage even, you are then employed by an organisation which sees benefit in your service and your skills. And in my case, it was law firms. In other people's cases, it's other organisations. It might well be companies, or it might well be government legal service and that sort of thing. So the point is that it differs from the self-employed bar, which in the way that after you finished pupillage at the self-employed bar, you go on to join a set of chambers and practice as a self-employed individual in that chambers, you're contributing towards the costs of running that chambers, but very much a lone wolf. And so whilst we are trying to slightly plug the employed bar here, hopefully it will give you an insight into a different option, which is perhaps not as well known as it should be, we think. So that's me. That's what employed barristers are in a very brief nutshell. But as you will see as we go on, the variety available to you at the employed bar is huge, and I hope that is demonstrated by the panel we've got here this evening. And so first of all, I would like to introduce Lady Rose, who is a judge at the Supreme Court, so at the very top of the pyramid of hierarchy of law, very top of her game, and she's going to introduce herself and to explain a little bit more about her trajectory and how she comes to be where she is today. And then we will go on, and other people will introduce themselves, and we'll follow up with hopefully a sort of conversation followed by questions. So that's the format. Thank you very much, Lady Rose.
Thank you for that introduction, Dan. And I'm very delighted to be part of this panel And I only wish there'd been this kind of BACFI organised event when I'd been a student, because it might have saved me quite a lot of heartache at various points in my career. Because I was qualified as a barrister many years ago, and really there was nothing placed before us as options for careers other than going into one of the magic circle firms or going into private practice as a barrister. So I started out in a very conventional route in pupillage and then as a tenant in a set of chambers in Gray's Inn. And I assumed when I started out that I would stay at the bar for the whole of my career in those chambers. But after about 10 years, I decided I wanted to leave. And there were two motivations for that. First, I decided I wasn't really enjoying being an advocate in court, and that's quite a disadvantage if you're getting to be fairly senior junior. And also, I'd become very specialised in what the chambers focused on, which was competition law. And I'd always thought I wanted to do a broader range of work than that. So I really had no idea, though, what other things there were available. But I had the good fortune to happen upon the government legal service, and I moved there and had 12 very happy and fulfilling years in the government legal service. My first role was in the Treasury, working on the bill team for what became the Financial Services and Markets Act. And that was absolutely fascinating, seeing how a bill is put together, how it goes through Parliament, and then co-leading the team that drafted all the statutory instruments to bring the act into effect. After about 4 or 5 years there, I moved to the Ministry of Defence and worked in the legal department there, and that was a very busy post during the course of the Iraq War in 2002, 2003. And after 3 years there, I moved to the House of Commons. And the House of Commons job was part-time because as soon as it became possible for employed lawyers to pursue a judicial career, I was clear that that was really what I wanted to do. And so I then got a part-time fee-paid tribunal post back in my early specialism in competition law on the Competition Appeal Tribunal. And for a year or so, I juggled both the work in the House of Commons and being a tribunal judge. And then I decided to leave the civil service and focus on tribunal work. And ultimately, that led to my appointment as High Court judge, and then up to the Court of Appeal, and since April of this year in the Supreme Court. So I've had followed a varied path. At the time that I was appointed to the High Court bench, I think I was the first person from the government legal service to be appointed. Since I joined the judiciary, Rowena Collins-Rice, a former colleague of mine, has also become a High Court judge, but there are many other government legal service lawyers working in fee-paid judicial posts of various kinds. So that's my path so far.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. I know we're not meant to ask questions yet, but did you know you wanted to be in the judiciary in some way or other for quite a long time before the door sort of finally opened?
I did, and my one great regret really in leaving practice was that at that time it meant that I would never be a judge, because at that time all judges were drawn from private barristers, certainly in the senior judiciary. But I wasn't prepared to stick it out at the bar on the off chance that I might make it onto the bench ultimately. But yes, as soon as that became available, I went to see the then Treasury Solicitor to ask about it, and they were very supportive of my ambitions, and that was why I was able then to move to a part-time civil service post to combine with the judicial role.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you. We'll probably have more questions on that towards the end. But in the meantime, I'd just like to introduce Sonia Hayes, who will speak a bit more about her own journey in a similar fashion. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you very much. So I sit as an assistant coroner in Oxfordshire, 4 areas of Kent and London South. I gave up my employed practice when COVID hit because obviously we had some special challenges. I was combining my coronial work with my employed practice and had done since 2014. So I started, I did a science degree like Dan. Mine was psychology, more science-based than social, I must say, but decided I wanted to be a barrister. And at that time, I had got married very young. I had 2 very tiny children. It wasn't something that was easy to do. I had to do my bar course part-time in the evenings after work, trying to juggle everything. And it was very, very difficult. Trying to get pupillage was even more difficult. And I thought I needed money while I was trying to do that. And so started to work. When I was doing my bar course, I did have close contact with the inn. I tried to get as much experience as I could while I was still a student. And I did work as well as that, as I said. And I went to evenings where they were training people to train students on advocacy and ethics, and learned a lot and met some people. And I got my first job, non-qualified, a 2-week contract on the back of that, where someone said at the inn that I was looking for a job and gave me that contract. And that contract was my happy accident. I started there and they kept me there for a year. My employer did try, this was many years ago, to get approval to become a pupillage provider. It didn't work. Later, I must say, for a colleague that came up behind me, it did. So I found myself in a difficult position, having to work, trying to struggle to get pupillage. It wasn't working for me. And I did go through the qualified lawyers transfer tests. And again, I had to work and do that in my spare time, which I did not have much of. I was very fortunate that I was given a lot of support by a general counsel who was a member of BACFI and did support me through my journey. So that really was my happy accident. And then when that contract finally finished, having started for 2 weeks and it ended after a year, I had found that I had a lot more experience than I ever would have got trying to go down the chambers route. And I did actually get my qualification for pupillage by exception, and I did manage to do that. I did go initially, though. Rules were different then. You couldn't do litigation, conduct litigation as a barrister. Of course, that's changed now. So I had to do higher rights of advocacy, so I was able to do some of that. But I was one of the first employed barristers to get rights to conduct litigation, which I think is much easier to do now. And I found that I got a lot more responsibility. And I did start in finance and corporate work, and very quickly went into healthcare. And I found that that was my niche. I managed to combine everything that I knew into that practice, and it was very wide and very fulfilling. And I did manage to get a very good court experience. So I was able to go into tribunals. We've heard Lady Rose talk about those. I did. And I also found I was able to combine my day job with judicial review work. I did get into the Court of Appeal. So you can find yourself in employment, in industry, and actually go into court. My employers were very, very supportive. I then started to do some inquest work as well. They paid for my postgraduate diploma in forensic medical science, because employers do like to support their employees and move them on and bring them forward, and mine were. So I was very fortunate, and I did start to get my coronial posts. I got them one at a time, I hasten to add, not all together. And I do jury inquests now. And as I said, I gave up the day job. I have worked on inquiries as well. I worked on the blood contamination inquiry and some of the other big inquiries during my career, and I have found it very, very fulfilling. And I think it's understanding that you can do things, and a wide variety of things, and you do get the support. So BACFI have also been very useful, answering questions about practicing certificates and how you navigate your way through as an employed barrister. So I found that very, very helpful as well.
Oh, that's brilliant, Sonia. Thank you. I think one of the themes which is slightly coming through already is how the rules seem to have changed over time to make things easier. Because, and I've noticed that myself. But you certainly sounded like you had a difficult and challenging path to tread. But
Yes.
you've done so very successfully, and now it feels like, in a way, you've got your pick of your opportunities, given you've said that you've decided to give up your employed bar role to be an assistant coroner full time now. So that's it's a nice option to have, in a way.
Yes. I think BACFI have been instrumental in helping to change some of those rules and some of the challenges, actually. They really have. And working through with some of the ethics work I've done, things have really changed. And certainly the rights to conduct litigation, I don't think years before that would have been even possible. I found myself in a very difficult position. And I suddenly went to sign something and I thought, I can't do that. And did ring up for support, and found that actually this was going to be an option. And I was then given assistance very quickly. So yes, the rules have changed enormously.
Yes, I mean, we can always talk a bit more about the rules later on if people have questions about things that you have to do and ways to navigate, but that's very helpful. Thank you. Just like to introduce our next panel member, if I may. It's Sharon Blackman, OBE, who's joined us, and she's basically Managing Director and General Counsel. And she at a City bank, I should say, but she's going to introduce herself much better than I could do, and so I'll hand over to her now. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, apologies for joining a little bit later. A few technical issues there. So I'm a Managing Director and General Counsel at City, which is an investment bank, a global investment bank with offices in over 100 different jurisdictions around the world. I qualified with no intention, actually, of entering the employed bar, I guess. But fully with the intention of picking up a pupillage and, going to the self-employed bar. Fortunately, or perhaps, I don't know, at the time I suspect I felt quite unfortunately, I did not get a pupillage in the first round. And so I was actually quite buoyant about it. I thought, okay, I've got a plan. I'm going to take a year out. I'm going to get some experience to make me a bit more of an attractive candidate next time round, which is the way to do it. And fortuitously, I guess, I was told about a position which was a permanent position as employed, as a lawyer in a financial services company, which I interviewed for, and the interview was beyond fabulous. And I thought, actually, yeah, I quite like this idea. This is going to be great for a year. Famous last words, because 3 years later, I was still there. And I think through that first year, there was a lot of soul searching around whether or not I should stay or whether I should leave. But frankly, economically, I was not in a position where it seemed sensible to leave a job that A, I was really enjoying, and B, gave me certainty, ability to pay off loans, build a future. I'd bought a home actually by that time. My life was really moving on. And I'd realised that actually I was entitled to get a practicing certificate. At the time, I know it's not the case now, but at the time you could go to employed practice directly, having not completed pupillage. Now, I did go back and complete pupillage, but and some of the time that I spent in that organisation counted towards it. So it's quite interesting that in many ways it was a plan that went wrong, but it righted itself. And there's an amazing array of opportunities that are there for you with the skills that you have. And I think it's sometimes very difficult to understand the breadth of those opportunities, because they are genuinely what you can imagine and way, way beyond that as well. The skills that you have are so transferable. And I know that right in the moment, it feels as if you're stepping away from what you really, really want. But I think sometimes it's really useful to get a little bit of perspective around that, and also to recognise that this would not prevent you from going back to the self-employed bar should you wish to pursue that as an opportunity at a later stage. So I did go back and do pupillage. My second employer, funnily enough, bizarrely, was there was a majority of barristers there, and so they set themselves up as a pupillage training organisation, filled out all the forms and insisted that I go into chambers, and I went into chambers. I went to 2 different sets of chambers for a spell in each, and completed my pupillage, for which I am exceptionally grateful, because the experience was fantastic. But it did actually confirm to me that I really enjoyed being closer to the commercial activity, really helping the business to formulate the decisions that they were taking. And that really worked for me. Actually, I was pretty good at it as well. And so although I have to confess that I've toyed a couple of times with the idea of going to the self-employed bar, it's not genuinely been something, because I've just been having so much fun with the work that I've been doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, it's nice to have the option, isn't it? But I think that's really telling in terms of the sort of gaining exposure, the flexibility, and then the ability to kind of have those options, but then actually turn them down, if you like, and say, actually, now I know better. I can make some better decisions. And it brings to mind somebody I knew who absolutely hated pupillage and what that job entailed, and I think probably left the bar altogether, not even as an employed barrister. So that's a real shame and a real loss, and I think it's important that everyone realizes that there are other ways of having an incredibly fulfilling and successful career. So on that note, I would like to introduce Thomas Keane, who's done a lot of varied things, judging by his biography, and I'm sure he's about to tell us about a few of those now. So hello, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Dan, and good evening to everyone. I must firstly say that BACFI have been very supportive of my career and my change of career, as you will hear, by providing people to mentor me and also opportunities to meet people. So I would advise all those students and anyone else attending to become a member of BACFI. At the end of the day, every profession is a profession about people, and you never know who you might meet and where it may help you in your career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. I'm not going to say too much about the reasons why. You can ask those in the questions part of the evening. But as someone who has just started pupillage, I thought it'd be useful for those of you who are contemplating applying both to the employed bar and the self-employed bar, useful for you to hear my story, because it may give you some comfort, but also some ideas as well. So I'm from East Yorkshire. I attended a comprehensive school, probably one of the worst schools in Yorkshire, and I come from a very poor family. It was not easy at all. I received a scholarship when I was 16 or 17 to go and study at Oxford pre-application, because I was contemplating, thinking, oh, that's the place to go. And I got that from the Sutton Trust. And I went to Oxford and I realised that actually it wasn't the right thing for me at all. So I didn't pursue that. And because I was very good at music, I pursued a career as a classical musician. So I came down to London at 18 and went to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. and spent 4 years there, which was pretty grueling. They say that the legal profession is competitive and difficult, but I can assure you that the world of a practicing artist and the training for that is equally so. I graduated and turned down a scholarship in Germany to actually just start up being a self-employed musician in London, and then built a portfolio career, as what they would call now, in that I started playing for Britain's Sinfonia, which is the chamber orchestra at the Barbican. I was teaching and started teaching at the Guildhall and became a professor there, and also developed a career, basically project management in the arts, bringing organisations together in arts projects. So worked with organisations such as Radio 3, Classic FM, the Royal Philharmonic Society, Rambert Dance. So it was a wonderful career. But when I got to my late 20s, early 30s, I started thinking, do I want to be doing this for the rest of my life? And I think it's true to say that many of us change quite significantly in our 20s. And I started going back actually to my earlier days of schooling and what I was interested in. And I was always very interested in public speaking, and was also quite academic as well. And I can remember a friend of the family saying to me, you know, what about being a barrister? And I had contemplated it when I was younger, but music took over. But it seemed to resurface when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a go. So I changed career and started studying law part-time. I did the conversion course part-time, which was pretty grueling. I then did the bar course part-time, which was extremely grueling. I don't envy anyone doing any study part-time, but I think it's safe to say that anyone who completes legal studies part-time deserves extra recognition, because it really isn't the easiest path at all. I was fortunate that I did get a scholarship, a big scholarship from the Inner Temple, which I think is something everyone should go for. Don't be afraid of applying for a scholarship. It isn't as daunting as it sounds, and you may be pleasantly surprised. But as I started the bar course part-time, I realized that I needed to gain some experience. You know, experience is something that all the panelists have touched upon, and it is important, I think, particularly now, to understand not just the academics of law, but the real life practicalities of how law is applied. And so I applied for a research assistantship at the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law. They provide these every quarter for 3 months. Mine ended up being 8 months, but it was fascinating working with barristers and with researchers on a wide variety of research topics, from social housing to competition law to tax. And then I started volunteering at Keane, which is a city law school initiative, which is the company insolvency pro bono scheme at the Rolls Building. Again, fascinating to be witnessing advice being given to those who really do need it, who have their businesses on the line, and their companies are about to be wound up. But then I started looking for some paid work, and was fortunate to be given an internship for a year in the commercial and corporate team at Warner Brothers. And I think this is one of the reasons why I've been invited on this panel, because I then spent 6 years working in-house, working with businesses and gaining experience. So I did a year at Warner's. I did then a year and a half at Time Publishers, which is then the largest magazine publishers in the country. I then moved to Formula One and spent 2 years in the legal team there. And then I spent a year just this past year at Convex Insurance, which is a new reinsurance company in the city. One of the reasons why I worked so long in-house is because my partner had cancer. And when I finished the bar course, I had applied once, right when I finished, and I got through to a final round, which went okay, but I just didn't feel as if I had the experience or the knowledge really firmly in my grasp to give pupillage interviews a go. But then I had to take 2 years away from applying for pupillage. And at that time I thought, oh my goodness, this is the end. This is absolutely just going to not work out for me. You know, I'd be changing career. Where's it all going to lead? In hindsight, I look back and think I've been very fortunate to have acquired the experience I have in-house, particularly in-house, because it gives you, as we'll probably discuss later, a much wider range of skills and knowledge, which I think can benefit either going to the self-employed bar or the employed bar, or even in private practice as a solicitor. So I applied for pupillage this past year in the spring. I thought I'd give it one more go, and it really was my last chance, I thought, because I had taken a few years away from it, and was fortunate to be given a pupillage to start this year. And so I actually started at number 5 as their business and property pupil about 3.5 weeks ago.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think that more than anything, perhaps, that we've heard so far just shows what dogged determination can achieve. I mean, you sort of mentioned fortunate, but I don't think there's anything about that. When you with hindsight, often things seem to be, oh, wasn't I lucky and all the rest of it. But you've got where you are through just keeping going and keeping, taking up various opportunities along the way. But I think when we've all met before, we talked about doors opening, and sometimes you say one door opens, another shuts, but actually sometimes one door opens and 3 more appear, because you're creating opportunity for yourself. And I think that's what you've done. And all credit to you. But I think it's a real example for everybody who's watching when they're feeling a bit down about how things are going, because it's not until you've arrived, and in some ways you never really arrive, but that you can look back and see the path you've trod, and it's difficult to know where you're meant to be going from the other end, from the beginning. So I would really echo that, and I perhaps a bit of my own experience plays into that slightly, in that I found it very hard to get pupillage. I was lucky in that the person they wanted for pupillage in the end was also wanted by everybody else. So they had to go second best, or maybe third best even, and choose me. And I knew at that point that was the case, because they'd already rejected me by then. So they came crawling back, and I had no other option. So I said, yes, all right, that sounds good. And I found pupillage very difficult. It was a very difficult environment. And we can talk about that a bit more, perhaps. I'm sure everyone's got stories, but very difficult environment, because I wasn't from the same background as the majority of people in chambers. I didn't necessarily understand the unwritten rules. I didn't appreciate that in some ways, particularly, and this might just be for me, but it might also be common to others, it was a 1-year interview. I thought it was essentially a training year where you should ask questions to find out things, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, that's not true from their point of view. So you can have a very difficult time. And I got to the point where they're supposed to make a decision, and they said that they wanted to delay making a decision, and they kept me hanging on basically until the very end of the pupillage, by which time somebody else I know I knew at a different chambers had been let go from their pupillage. There was no tenancy for them. It was, for various reasons, it was a difficult time in history for IP work, and he'd gone off and he'd got himself a job at a solicitor's firm. I was then told there was no space for me, and there was no jobs going, and so I then got a third 6 pupillage at a different chambers. And for people who don't know, there's ability to carry on doing 6-month stints in order to keep practicing and to get experience. And one of the questions I was asked at the interview for that was, do you have a private income? And I was like, I thought this was a job. That's the whole point. And so it can be very confusing and very, very depressing in some ways, and it can be, some of this stuff can be quite surprising. And I think things are better now, I should say. But what that meant was that when the time came to make a choice, I was facing basically bankruptcy or going into a law firm, or in truth, my choice was stay at the bar and do something other than IP, or leave the bar and continue to do IP. And it's a very invidious choice to have to make, actually. And I ended up having to throw my net quite wide, and ended up moving to Southampton from London, which was never on the cards. But with hindsight, it was all very good for me, and it was all the right thing at the right time. But it was never part of the plan. And I think we've probably all got stories about that sort of aspect of the process. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, Thomas, when you say it's very competitive, perhaps not as competitive as professional music circles you moved in, but it's competitive, and it can be very disheartening, particularly if you don't go into it with your eyes open. So hopefully this evening we can hopefully open some eyes, not to deter people, but just so that they can summon up the sort of fortitude to keep going. I think that's probably what we'd probably like to achieve out of this evening. And on that note, obviously the talk is entitled, let me just check what the title is so I don't misquote it, What It Takes to Succeed at the Employed Bar. So I just thought I'd throw that question open so that we answer the direct question. So perhaps each person could give their view on what it does take to succeed at the employed bar, and obviously you can interpret that question how you like, but it might be helpful to say what you mean by success as well. So perhaps returning to Lady Rose first, for your thoughts on that, please.
I think that success is having an enjoyable and fulfilling career, and it's important when you're going through your time wherever you are to keep checking with yourself whether you're enjoying what you're doing and also where you're heading. I remember I was very taken by a poster at my local tube station, which was, I think, for a recruitment consultancy, that said, as you climb the career ladder, make sure it's leaning against the right wall. And if you look at the top of the ladder, which is what I did when I was about 10 years old, and I thought, when I get to the top of this ladder, I'm going to be really miserable. Because I see what people who are at the top of the ladder, the lives they're leading, I would not be happy doing that. So I think that it's being successful is making sure that you're always enjoying it and seeing where it takes you. And I think that part of that is two things. First, I think you succeed if you recognize your own skills are transferable. And I was very taken by what Sharon said about the importance of recognizing the value of skills that you've learned. And I think that people in the self-employed bar get very specialized, as I had done, and that makes it very frightening to contemplate moving outside that specialism. But I think that success is also recognizing that a lot of your legal skills are generic. You learned how to read a contract, you've learned how to interpret case law, how to look at statutes, what you're likely to find there. And all those skills are entirely dependent of the kind of law that you're actually doing. And that's certainly what I learned in the government legal service, where you move from one department to another every couple of years, and that's a theme that I hear from the others. It's moving to different areas of law and recognize that you have the skill to do that. I think linked to that is recognizing that no experience is wasted. That's another thing that I feel that all the members of the panel have said. I don't regret the 10 years I spent at the bar. I suspect Thomas doesn't regret the time that he spent as a musician, because I learned from that experience and it's helped me to make me the lawyer that I am. And the fact that I decided to leave doesn't at all diminish the value of my experience at bar, and the fact that I decided to leave the government legal service doesn't diminish the value of what I did for myself, my own growth, and in a small way for the government legal service too. It all helped to make me the lawyer that I've become. So I don't regret any of the stages, and I think that that's a successful career as well. Looking back and thinking, yes, all the different things I've done, I've really enjoyed. They've really made me grow as a person and a lawyer. If you can get to the end of your career and look back and think that, and I think that that's a successful career.
That's brilliant, thank you. Sonia, what do you think it takes to succeed? What does that mean?
For me, I think at first I was so busy just trying to learn and do things. The diversity of the work that was being thrown at me was very, very challenging at quite a junior level. And so I was so busy striving to get it all right and to learn and learn and learn. I wasn't looking. I think the illustration Lady Rose has given about make sure your ladder's leaning against the right wall, I really didn't see that, but I found everything very enjoyable. I think one of the things was learning very much about the client, because of course you do still have a client. And if you work for a very big organization, understanding who the client is at any one time is something that you sometimes have to ask yourself. Understanding what the client needs from you, and then you have to start, as you get a bit more senior, you have to start trying to anticipate and telling them things that they don't even know they need. I became quite an expert in regulatory law because of the environments I was in and some of the work I was doing. And I felt I was really adding value to the business. And I think that echoes some of what Sharon has said, how much she enjoyed developing the business, taking the business forward, and feeling that you were really part of that. I worked for a very good employer for a very long time. I did make bonus, which was something I never anticipated. In becoming a barrister. That's something I didn't really understand working in an environment. That's something that can happen. So that was very rewarding. The chance to develop specialist expertise does come. But I think for me, one of the things that I do, and I did right up until I stopped being at the employed bar, was I did update myself for about half an hour every day on new law because of the breadth of the work that I was doing. I really had to be careful. I think I learned a very hard lesson. I was in an employment tribunal doing quite a big case and made some submissions on case law, only to be told by the judge, Miss Hayes, I'm with you, but I'm afraid the appeal court isn't, as of yesterday. And so I think that was a lesson I learned, that actually you think you know things and that may change. So for me, I think some of the things, I was so busy enjoying my career and being very supported, I didn't see the road several years in advance. I certainly didn't think about judicial post. A bit like Thomas, I was the first one in my family to go to university. I didn't think about judicial office, and it was my PA that actually said to me, I think you'd be rather good at doing that, which is rather odd that it takes someone else to see opportunities for you sometimes. But I think success for me was having an enjoyable career, understanding that I did want to stay where I was, and was having a very enjoyable time. And court practice was something for me I did want, and I was in an environment where that was supported too. And I think it's being not afraid to grasp opportunities or even ask for opportunities. Yeah,
that's easier said than done, isn't it?
So it really is.
You know, perhaps, yeah, get onto that maybe.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. Over to you.
Well, a lot of what has already been said resonates very well with me indeed. If I think about what I would, how I would describe success, really, I would have to say a fulfilled life, both professionally and personally. But I was going to try and focus on success as in climbing the corporate ladder, because I think that's probably of interest. And so it's a given that it takes hard work, absolutely a given. I would say that as a junior lawyer, the key thing you need to do is to build your brand, build your expertise, and build your knowledge. And the only way to do that is to do it. The practical outweighs the academic, I think, in every circumstance, because to simply read about it is one thing, to have to apply it yourself, it takes you to a whole different level of capability, understanding, and appreciation. And so I would say cast your net broadly. If you're in an employed environment, make sure that you are getting the broadest work that you can within that environment, that you're working with different lawyers as well, because it's really interesting to observe the way that seniors practice, to observe the good things they do, which you want to try and replicate and build into your style, and also to observe the things which are not that great. and everybody has them because we're all human. We all have our flaws. And so I would say curiosity, absolutely vital. As you then progress through your career, becoming a trusted partner. Sandra's mentioned that as well. I think it allows you to get a much closer feel to the business. And I guess how I would describe that from my own experience is that at a very junior level, I loved sitting on the trading floor. Absolutely love it. I love the buzz of it. It's amazing to watch the traders and have them be interacting and asking each other questions. But because you're there, and it's unusual to have a lawyer there, and not all lawyers in banks are comfortable being on the trading floor, but I personally loved it. I like the pace of it. So to be able to interject into one of their conversations, say, no, can't do that, you must do this, think about that, no, that's not wrong language, do this. And actually they loved it because they knew that I was putting them on the right path. So very, very quickly, you can become their trusted person when they start to come and ask you about things that have got very little to do with your genuine legal knowledge. But actually, it's the skill that you have in thinking around the corner, strategically considering what else might be important and who else that they may need to speak with, which becomes as valuable to them as the black letter law that you know and can apply. So the final thing, conscious of time, were two things. Build your network, because actually that will help you assess opportunities. It will help you understand what's in front of you and help you navigate the challenges that will surely come. The other thing I was going to say was that for me, it was very difficult to build a practice in my environment, which allowed me to do advocacy in the sense of going to court. We have a litigation team, and even they, I would say, go out to counsel, either a law firm or chambers, to do their advocacy. And because I was getting fulfillment through bits of public speaking, presenting in meetings, different ways of getting that advocacy piece, initially that I didn't mind. But there came a point when I decided that actually what I needed to do was to get some advocacy experience and fulfill that piece a little bit differently. And so I joined the pro bono committee and started to build out some of the advocacy opportunities that the company was very happy to get involved with, because that satisfied some of their volunteering and ESG, environment, social government aspirations. And as a result, I've been on that committee for well over a decade. I've chaired it for the last 5 years. We've won awards for the pro bono pieces that we've done. So it is really quite amazing the ways in which you can put your skills to good use and to succeed and to get personal satisfaction as well as helping people.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Goodness, I mean, that's so interesting. And thank you for dealing with the sort of corporate angle. What I was thinking when you were speaking was that the first part of what you were saying is how to succeed in a corporate environment, which obviously overlaps with being an employed barrister, but doesn't necessarily exclude certain other jobs in that environment. But towards the end there, when you started talking about advocacy, I thought to myself, well, there's the real barrister bit coming in here now, and that's the sort of special sauce, if you like, in relation to that side of things, and just again shows the versatility and the variety. And of course, advocacy is not out of bounds for lots of other people. You know, solicitor advocates exist and all the rest of it. But I think there's an approach which is exemplified by what you're talking about, which is just this idea that you can do these things, and you therefore you seek out the things you want to do because you're confident you can do them, and that confidence is probably quite a hard one, and we can probably talk about that a bit more in a minute as well. But just turning over to Thomas now, please, for your definitions of success and how to get there.
Well, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I think one of the difficulties in the legal sphere, and I think I can say this as someone who's come into it as a second career, is that it's very easy to be swept away by thinking one does need to be applying to the top sets, the top law firms, and see that as the ideal. And I think what that misses particularly is that much good experience doesn't necessarily come from those types of organizations, particularly when one's training, or particularly when one's looking for roles going into the legal sphere. So, if you're a student and you're wanting to gain legal experience through paralegaling, paralegaling in-house in a company will afford you much greater variety, experience, benefits, and probably better pay than a paralegal role in a law firm. I think one of the key things about that is that when you're working in a company, it will be a role. You are an employee of the company, and that role is created for you. It's not a transient role. It's not as if you're just doing, and I choose the opposite carefully here, but you're not being a paralegal for doc review, going into a law firm for 6 months, and then that's the end of the matter. When you're in a company, you are there as a position, and the role is needed by the business. And so I recommend students to look at these roles. I don't think they consider it too much. And everyone thinks about going to be a paralegal in a law firm or maybe getting a bit of clerking experience, but you will gain far greater experience, and also will be able to refine your skills, particularly in how you advocate within a business. And I think the other thing is that advocacy isn't just in the courtroom or in the arbitration room or in the mediation. Being able to advocate a position for the business on a particular contract or a particular legal problem clearly, concisely, in terms that can be understood by non-legally trained people, because that is one of the things about being in-house, is that you're predominantly working not with other lawyers, which has many advantages, not least in honing one's skills. So the other thing I just want to touch on is finding roles very briefly, and that is connected with contacts, and that is get in contact with recruiters, because the roles which I found all came through recruiters, and 2 of them came through the same recruiter. If you do a good job in one job and you feel it's the time to move, and don't be afraid to move, because sometimes one has to be aware of when you're benefiting from a role and when you're not, then use your network and use recruiters to find that next role, and one thing does lead to the next. But as success comes, one has to be true to oneself and not be swept away by thinking, okay, I've not got a top flight Magic Circle training contract, or I've not got a brilliant star study pupillage. You'd be surprised actually what can come from even the most menial of tasks.
I think that's incredibly helpful. I think I wish I'd had that advice when I was starting out, because the other thing I think to add to that is you may have to make choices based on circumstance. Because you need the money, or because you can't find opportunities in a certain geographical location or whatever. But yes, it may not be the ideal, but it's going to be far from worthless, and you may find it the best thing you ever did. And I think that is what's interesting about it. Is I sometimes say for this, because I mentor some university students, there is more than one way to skin a cat, and everybody's trying to pile into London. And I sometimes suggest, well, look at those regional firms with London offices, get a job in one of the regional offices, and then get transferred once they know how good you are. That's another way of doing it. So I think that's absolutely very helpful, Thomas. And of course, in case it wasn't entirely obvious, Thomas's pupillage is in Chambers, and therefore he's heading back into the self-employed arena. So it just goes to show that no doors are forever closed, and it's quite fluid and flexible. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, because Thomas mentioned the black letter law side of things, the sort of legal nitty-gritty, and so did Sharon actually. And the thing that occurred to me when they both said it was, nobody cares. Nobody that you're dealing with in a practical environment, which is practical, just to use Sharon's word, is absolutely spot on. Nobody, I mean, most people don't care about black letter law. You're lucky if the judge cares, but it's what they care about is what can they do, what shouldn't they do, what are the risks, how do you balance them, what are the costs, what are the payoffs. It's all of that stuff, and that's incredibly practical, as Sharon said, and it's commercial, and you learn that through experience. And just my tip would be just to try and put yourself in the other person's shoes. What do they know? What don't they know? How can you help them bridge that gap? And on advocacy before the court, well, I haven't really done any for decades. and that's partly due to the route I've taken. And I should just add that we as a firm would often instruct outside counsel. And the person that I mentioned before who'd left the self-employed bar to get the only job that was going in London when I should have had it, he is now back at the self-employed bar, and I instruct him on cases. So, you know, these things sort of come full circle quite often. So there's just a little bit of that in there as well. But no, that's really very interesting and very helpful. I don't know if anybody on the panel wanted to pick up on anything anybody else said, just to sort of see if, yes, Lady Rose.
Yes, I really agree with what Sharon said about part of the enjoyment of being working for a particular organisation, whether it's a government department or a particular firm, is that you get involved in the nitty-gritty of their business and you understand their business. And I think that is very important, partly because it's interesting if you choose an employer who's working who's in an area that interests you. But it is also important that when you, as you inevitably do, have to go in, as Thomas was saying, to advocate, whether it's to a Secretary of State, whether it's to the Board of Directors, whether it's to the head of the legal department, and say, you really can't do that. And this is why I think a bit of black letter law is the magic that we hold that is going to persuade them. But it's also important that they know that you're giving that advice from the basis of understanding the practicalities of their business. So they can't just dismiss it to say, well, she doesn't really understand what goes on in real life here. She doesn't understand the practicalities of what she said. If you learn the business as well, then your advice is much more likely to be listened to because they know that it's coming from a kind of understanding. I think sometimes to allow them with a few statutory visions or the name of a case is sometimes can help.
Judiciously used, you can sprinkle that around to wow them. Absolutely, yes. Yeah, no, absolutely.
To make sure you know something that they don't.
Exactly.
Why they should listen to you.
Completely agreed. Sonia, did you have something to add?
Yes, one of the things, speaking about black letter law, sometimes understanding when you have major changes, particularly in regulatory law, which has and can have a very big impact on the business, approaching it from a real black letter point of view, you might be able to do that to the board and their eyes would probably glaze over after about 3 minutes flat. So you have to try to understand how you're going to get their attention. And that is a skill that you really do learn. And I think that's where things that Sharon said about becoming that trusted partner, you can then develop. I did this a number of times where there was very big law that affected the industry I was working in. We even developed training packages to go out to the business and trying to convince people that they need to change what they're doing. Unless you put that in a way that they understand, people won't change their behaviour. So it's got to have a consequence and meaning and understanding to them. And that's where, as a barrister, you still can add an awful lot of value to the business, even if it does involve black letter law. It's about how you do it. And, you know, if people do like training, that can be another route to your advocacy skills, and they can be very valuable.
Yep, I completely agree with that, and I think that's another aspect which is worth mentioning, as is the closeness you have to a client. For example, in my situation in a law firm, you have lots of different clients, which is incredibly fascinating. But you're closer to them than a barrister in self-employed practice. Self-employed practice would be. I think that's helpful as well. I was just going to mention one other thing, which is that when I first started out as an employed barrister in a law firm, it wasn't that common, I think, to be fair. And quite often I'd get a sign off on my signature, which was just barrister, as opposed to associate or senior associate, you know, all these sort of hierarchical terms. And it was brilliant because nobody knew really what it meant. They had no idea how senior or not I was. And that really did give me, I think in a way, things have moved on and are more sort of equitable and transparent and fair now, which is a shame on that score. But you know, for example, I remember I'd probably been actually practicing for about 18 months. And I was sitting in what was a strategy meeting. It was a reputational risk strategy meeting, effectively with the board, of a large government, I don't know if you know it, it was National Savings and Investment, basically, I'll just say it, sitting on the board, being asked questions about reputational risk and being asked to advise. And I think only because they probably hadn't clocked how junior I was. And at one point, somebody asked me who my juniors were that could be contacted in case of emergency if I couldn't be reached. And I was thinking, oh God, there is nobody below me. And so that really sort of brings it home. And I think you do get the opportunity to, I think, build your brand, perhaps, is the best way that Sharon put it. And there's a lot of scope for that, I think, as an employed barrister. So that would be my sort of last comment on that. Does anybody else have anything else to say on the panel before we perhaps move to questions? No, brilliant. All right, thank you very much, everybody. That was very interesting, and I'm sure there'll be lots more stories coming out if people ask the right questions of you. Somebody should ask Sonia how to get over the fear, or how to feel the fear and do it anyway. We'll get to that. But before we sort of throw the floor open, there is an emailed question for Lady Rose that has come in from Mohammed Dookie. So I'm just going to read it out. I'll read out the first bit anyway. Lady Rose can answer how she sees fit. So this is from Mohammed. I wanted your opinion regarding the inclusion of appellate divisions of the courts in marshalling opportunities for pupillage, in other words, unpaid but supervised, from experienced professionals in non-legal fields wishing to be trained as adjudicators, judges, arbitrators, barristers. So I think the idea here is people who are perhaps a bit more senior trying to gain access to these professions, and if there is a potential route that way. Lady Rose, so over to you, please.
Yes, I think there are two things here. One is the sort of more formal pupillage setting, and the other is mentoring to people who are thinking of a judicial post. I know that with pupillage, there are a lot of opportunities in the Supreme Court and in the High Court and Court of Appeal for judicial assistance. And there are also marshalling opportunities which are available through schemes run by the Inns of Court. It's true that those tend to be focused on people who are just starting out, people who are doing the qualification or just starting out with their pupillage, but I don't see any reason why they couldn't be for more senior people. But what you all seem to be asking about is opportunities for mentoring for people who are thinking of coming into a judicial role, perhaps from an unconventional route, as I did. And I think that there's increasing recognition of the importance of not only just formally opening up the pool of people who can be appointed to judiciary, but really making that happen. And if you go on the Judicial Appointments Commission website, you'll see that they do have schemes for work shadowing and mentoring, particularly for people from groups which are currently underrepresented in the judiciary. And I would really recommend those kinds of mentoring and work shadowing schemes, giving you an opportunity to see what the work of a judge is like. I don't see the appellate's court being able to offer sort of formal pupillage, because I don't think we could offer the range of experience that you need in order to qualify for the bar. But I think that there are a lot of schemes out there to help people who are thinking of a judicial career to have some experience, in order to encourage people from the broadest possible pool of candidates to think of applying.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think it's probably fair to say that people probably need a bit of a legal background of some sort or another to go down that route.
Yes, I think I would say that you need a legal background. I think also that you would need some kind of litigation background as well. I think if you had spent your whole career at the employed bar or as a solicitor in non-contentious work, you might struggle to make the transition across. I think if you the first time you'd seen a pleading or seen what an injunction looks like or been inside a court was when you were a judge, I think that would be a big.
I completely agree with you. As a litigator and sitting as a deputy district judge, I think it helps to just have some of that stuff in your back pocket already. Sort of. But having said that, a friend of mine who's a tax lawyer has just recently been appointed as deputy district judge as well, and seems to be doing quite well at it. So these rules are not hard and fast, but I think that the key is to bring your transferable skills and to really maximise them. I suspect, as we've sort of been talking about today. So that's very helpful. Thank you, Lady Rose. In terms of opening things up to the floor, if anybody wants to raise their virtual hand or pop a question in the chat box, then obviously we're standing by to try and answer your questions as best we can. Don't be shy. This is your chance to start building your network. Oh no, okay, so nobody brave enough to. Oh, we've got one. Brilliant. Can't quite see. Sorry about that. That is Sean, whose hand's up. It's yeah, Sean. Yes. Hello.
Thank you so much for that excellent talk by the panel. I was just wondering, in terms of, I suppose, directing your own career, is going into the employed bar something that kind of happens through serendipity, or is it something that you really take initiative to kind of, do it yourself when you realize you want to be an employed barrister, or is it something that happens more in your experience as the opportunity sort of presents itself?
I mean, I'll go first on that one. I think probably the stories we've been telling have been a little bit serendipitous, possibly because, I'll speak for myself, my age. I think things are better now, and I think, in fact, I think Sandra included on the email about this event a list of pupillage providers who are not chambers. So hopefully that's a good resource. And so I think it's possible to make a concerted decision to go down that route. I think probably the way you would make your decision is to try and do some work experience in chambers, in different settings, understanding what the different jobs might entail. Hopefully we've given a bit of an insight today, but that would be my sort of initial reaction. Does anybody else on the panel have some thoughts about that? Sharon, yes.
Yes, I was going to say that interestingly, when I was at bar school, there was I don't recall her name, but there was somebody who was on my course with me, and when we were discussing, what we're going to do next and where we've applied, said, no, not doing any of that. I've got a job with NatWest Markets. And I was like, the earth is NatWest Markets? Well, it turns out, I mean, that's the very industry that I'm in now. And she had made a conscious decision right up front that actually she wanted to go to the employed bar. And I think for most people, it's the fact that they don't know what that even means. And when they think of, I want to be a barrister, they have this single image, wig and gown in court, even though a number of barristers in self-employed practice actually do very little advocacy, because I think if you've got a tax practice, you're unlikely to be on your feet for a number of years before you've got a lot of experience in that field behind you. And, your practice is largely paper. So I think there are more employed pupillages, I suspect, than there were before. I think that there's more knowledge about the options you have. Oh, don't know what happened there. And so whilst, yes, the examples that we've given probably sound a little bit kind of, well, what should I do now? And kind of on the back foot thinking about things, it doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, I would say it shouldn't be that way. When you're exploring your options, explore everything, because you do not know what is going to grab you and what is going to offer you the thing that really will excite you and move your life and your career forward.
Absolutely, and part of that is probably knowing yourself a little bit, and maybe you only find that out whilst doing these things. I mean, I would say that if I'd known then what I know now, I probably would have chosen it, because I enjoy being closer to the clients. I enjoy the team around me, the sort of the teamwork, the camaraderie, the support, and all that sort of thing. So it's just horses for courses, but it's a viable option, and you could choose it, I think. So thank you for the question, Ishan. We have a question in the comments from Hamela. Is there a good work-life balance at the employed bar? Right. Ooh, who wants to answer that one? Yes, go for it, Sonia.
So one of the things is you get regular income, you get a pension, you get paid holidays, you get support. Sometimes you have to work very hard. You can have to work very long hours. There are challenges, and the more senior you get, the more challenges there can be. But of course, yes, there is. And some of us may have to travel, but if you're at the self-employed bar, you really are hot-footing it all over the place, maybe up all night, looking at instructions you've only got sort of 12 hours before. And I think there is, and certainly I have had more time with family, had more support. As I said, I had tiny children when I started. When my husband had a life-threatening condition, and I was in the middle of a very big corporate transaction, I was given an awful lot of support. So I think that we have to say yes. Whilst I think the self-employed bar is trying, you just don't have that support network that you have with a big employer.
Yep, no, I think that's a very fair point. It's about that network, and I was going to say a little bit. It depends, because I'm sort of looking at it as someone who's done my entire career in solicitors' firms, essentially. So it might depend on the firm as well. You know, American law firms are very well known for having ridiculous hours targets, and nobody gets to go home basically ever. You know, whereas there are other firms that have better arrangements, and you know, you can pick your. It depends, even in a particular niche category like a solicitor's firm, for example. I was going to just say one thing which occurred to me, which is that if you think you fancy becoming a solicitor, that's obviously all well and good, but you can save a year by becoming a barrister, because the qualification of pupillage is a year rather than a 2-year training contract. So wham bam, save a year, get your salary a year earlier, and there you go. Come join the club. That's what I would say. Do we have any other comments from the panel on that, or any more questions from the audience? Give it a few seconds in case anybody's got any thoughts. Appreciate there's been quite a lot of information this evening, so maybe a little bit of processing perhaps. Sharon, were you going to say something?
Yeah, one additional thing that struck me as I'd been listening to everybody was around opportunities at the employed bar, and I guess the piece that I felt that hadn't been mentioned, but maybe I'd missed it, was around the ability to build management skills and leadership skills. Because clearly at the self-employed bar, it is you. And whilst you may end up in a position where you've got juniors and you're managing them vis-a-vis a case, actually the employed bar provides an opportunity for you to build the muscles around being an effective manager. And then should you progress from that into leadership, which is a bit more strategic, somewhat more, I would say, purpose-led, about persuading people to change and approach more fully, and guiding a department or a small team. So those are some of the things which may appeal to people, and which are really, I think, very focused on the employed bar and companies and corporates.
Absolutely. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's an important point, because of this, that in a lot of in the employed bar and in private practice with solicitors, as with doctors, as with teachers, there is a tendency as yet more senior to move more into management and into leadership and strategy, so that your day-to-day work is less legally focused. All those skills are very important, and a lot of people make that journey into management very comfortably and are very happy to do that. But some people just want to keep doing law for their whole of their career, and I count myself in that category. But that said, in the judiciary these days, if you look at the competencies that they're looking for most judicial posts, they will always include some kind of management experience or leadership experience or that kind of role, because increasingly judges are have additional out of court type work. So when I was in the High Court, I was the president of the Upper Tribunal Tax and Chancery Chamber, which was a leadership and admin role. I was also chair until recently of the Judicial Pensions Committee. Most judges in the High Court and Court of Appeal have 2 or 3 additional, so we would call corporate responsibility roles in a big company, and that's an increasing part of our work. One good thing about people coming from the employed bar is that they tend to have a lot of that experience, whereas people who have stayed at the self-employed bar struggle to get that kind of experience to fit them for a judicial role.
That's a very interesting point. I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of even at the employed bar, if you want to avoid management, you potentially can. In my own case, in law firms, there is an of counsel role, for example, which tends to be avoiding that a little bit. So you've got the choice in the employed bar, whereas if in your self-employed bar and you want to get management experience, it's much more difficult. So it comes back to that question of being able to have opportunity and choice, which I think is so has come through really clearly this evening, actually. I obviously said a hair running with Hermela there. She's asked, would you say that employed barrister and solicitor's work is similar? It depends, I think, is the answer to that. It really does depend on how you've built your brand and where you're working and, you know, what opportunities you've taken. So it can be. I think to be fair, my job probably is more like a solicitor's than anybody else on the panel, but it just depends, and it's just nice to have the option. You know, I have been asked to go back to self-employed practice by the head of a chambers at one point some years ago, and you know, nice to be asked, but also nice to make a positive choice and say no. So, you know, I think it's all about choice, it's all about opportunity, and hopefully that's what we've managed to get across this evening. That would be great. So I think that's probably it. Oh, we've got a question. PG Haida, Arish, yes, hello.
Yeah, the talk was really insightful. Thank you for that. I had a question about the distinguishment between the self-employed bar and the employed bar in terms of incentive to work harder. So my understanding of the self-employed bar is the harder you work, the more hours you put in, the better you get paid, and you sort of can manage that. Whereas at the employed bar, I have the understanding that you are paid a certain sum and you gotta work hard, or like as harder or as less harder perhaps. Like what drives that kind of dynamics?
Wow, what a good question. I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that. Is it you, Sharon? Or Sonia? Sonia's got, yeah,
I'll let Sharon go first if she wants.
No.
I just thought you looked like you were going to go there, Sharon. Sorry, mate.
I was, but go ahead, Sonia, and I'll go.
Well, certainly there is a corporate ladder structure, as Sharon said, and you can get promoted. I did. I started from a paralegal and ended up in charge of my whole department. So, and within that, there is increased pay. I got bonuses. So when I worked very hard on big transactions, I got paid bonus, which, as I said, was something I didn't expect. As my role changed, I still made bonus because of the value I was bringing into the business. So I don't think it's as simple to say at the self-employed bar, you can just earn more money as you progress. And I think if you speak to many of our colleagues at the self-employed bar, their experience is it can take a very long time, and you have some very lean times, because if you're not working, you're not paid. If you're not instructed, you're not paid. So I think that's
helpful. Sharon?
To be honest, very, very similar. I was just going to talk about the corporate structure and kind of like that progression on. So in banks, typically, as I guess as a lawyer, you'd come in as an AVP or VP. And I mean, all the banks have different titles, but in my institution, AVP, and there's officer roles below that, but typically I think you wouldn't come in as an officer role, but AVP, VP, SVP, director, managing director. Everybody in the leadership role is really at a managing director in my firm. And with each of those, and with every year, typically, actually, there's, as Sonia said, a bonus to be had. And if you've helped the firm perform well, there's a bonus to be had. And also, you know, pay rises, as well as, you know, shares, and there's other incentives, private healthcare, and there's such a mix of things that's there. I just don't think it's that simple. And regardless, both strands, trust me, you are going to have to work hard, and they're both competitive environments. So I wouldn't want you to take away from this that one is necessarily more competitive than they're just different, but they are both competitive.
Well, I mean, I would say maybe the employed bar is more predictable, but it's possibly more rigorous in the sense you will have appraisals and objectives, and, you know, there's all that structure around it. I was going to say, I think slightly in your question was the sort of question of how the reward is linked to how hard you work, and I was just going to say that, like any employee, there are times when you might feel underappreciated. And if that goes on for very long, you just leave. That's how that works. You know, you just take your services elsewhere. You know, banking on yourself, as it were. So, I think that's probably easier to do in a way at the employed bar than at the self-employed bar, where you sort of, you know, your brand is probably a bit more nebulous and, you know, linked to a chambers in some way. But so yeah. So thank you for the question, Arish. Good question. We've got one more. I think we've probably got time for this last question from Daryl. Hi, Daryl. Are you there, Daryl?
I am. Sorry, I just had to get set up in my dealing room. Having a look through the list of employed bar pupillage providers that came through us on a spreadsheet, I think I could probably split those into three groups: solicitors, government agencies, and then the sort of firms that are in the title of BACFI, finance, commerce, those sorts of firms. In this third group, that tends to not be where pupillages are offered. I wonder why not, if those firms are offering training contracts, for example, and is there anything the BSB should be doing? Are any of their rules stopping you offering pupillages? And is there anything they should be doing if you wanted to offer pupillages? Thanks.
Great question. Thank you, Daryl. I feel like this might be a Sharon one. Sorry, Sharon.
I think it's easier to offer. Frankly, I can only tell you my experience. It's been easier to offer training contracts. When I joined City 17 years ago, they were already offering training contracts. We'd set up training supervisors for two of the key legal entities in the UK, and you know, it was okay to employ somebody and then agree that you were going to invest in that person, and therefore offer them training to allow them to qualify, to expand their career within your organisation. The difficulty, I think, really with pupillages at the employed bar is that for my institution, for instance, we don't have typically a transient workforce where we are willing to put if we have a transient workforce, because obviously we have contractors, typically we're buying you in for your expertise. We're not training you. So the people that we want to train are our employees, because that's actually where we think there is value. It's our people that make us the great company that we think we are. And so it's slightly at odds, because you have to, there is a rule that it's not preferred that you provide the pupillage or offer the pupillage to somebody who is within. For good reason, they want you to advertise that and have it as an open contest. But if you think about it, that's then slightly at odds with the idea that your corporate has, which is we're built on this idea that we have employees, and therefore we want an employee first, and we will then fund you and give you that help and that expertise to grow and develop professionally if we judge that actually you satisfy certain internal criteria. So I think that for us has been the nub of it. have to say we have managed to offer a pupillage this year, even though we've been a pupillage training organisation for a decade. But that is also partly because the kind of candidates that we get, naturally, it's solicitors who are, or people who are thinking of going down the solicitor route, who more naturally consider there is an opportunity there. And I think more students who are at the bar should consider whether or not this is an opportunity that they can leverage and get the legal experience, and perhaps even encourage that firm to become a pupillage training organisation and offer them a pupillage. That's not easy to navigate, as I've told you, because there are rules there which you have to take into account. But that's really what makes the difference between why people offer and why they find it harder to do so.
It feels a little chicken and egg as well, just in terms of, you know, if you're going to envisage yourself having employed barristers and you want to train them, then you need to do pupillage. But quite often those employed barrister roles come up sort of a little bit on spec. I think it's getting better, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. Sonia had something to add. Yeah.
Yes, the regulator is looking at it, looking at some of the blockers that Sharon is talking about. Certainly there were ways to unblock them. My experience was my employer applied for me, didn't get it, but learnt a lot, and the next person came along. But of course that person then retired out of the business, and because of the way things are attached to certain individuals and the way it's all structured, the training provider status falls away as well if you're not in a very big organisation. So the regulator is looking at this currently, I can say that.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Whether there's an easy answer, but they are looking.
But that does sound like it's moving in the right direction. I remember that when I became an employed barrister in a law firm, you had to be, I think you had to be supervised still for your first 3 years by somebody who's appropriate, and that's not most solicitors. And so there was an issue there. I think she's still alive. That's good. There was an issue there, and thankfully in each of the firms for the first 3 years there was somebody who had higher rights of audience who was a suitable person to, and then on the conduct of litigation side you had to have somebody who was able to supervise you being qualified to conduct litigation, which barristers are not normally allowed to do. So there's all these different things which are getting quite into the detail perhaps for this time of the evening, and I think that probably we have to cut it short there. But thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for your questions. A quick plug for some future BACFI talks. There's Race and the Bar, moving things forward, and that's by Simon Regis, who is the 2020 Employed Barrister of the Year and co-chair of the Bar Council's Race Working Group. That's on Wednesday, the 3rd of November at 6 p.m, and you can register via email events@bacfi.org. And then after that, on I think it's the 8th of December, I'm missing the date on my note, the Denning Lecture 2021, The Future is Bright, with Sarah Lawson QC, General Counsel at the Serious Fraud Office, and the same thing in order to register. So it's just some other things you might find interesting. All that remains for me to do is to thank my other panel members. So thank you all very much for your insights. It's been absolutely a pleasure hearing from you, and I hope it was as useful to everybody who was watching as it was interesting for me as well. So thank you all very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.